Saladin.
What if I told you that everything you believed was a lie? Are you ready to learn the truth about a battle where a young king, who seemed doomed, took on the greatest military commander of his time? This story had no room for strategic cunning or overwhelming numerical superiority. Here, everything was decided by desperate and unshakable faith. This is the story of the Battle of Montgisard, where the Kingdom of Jerusalem, on the brink of collapse, dealt a crushing defeat to the army of the legendary Saladin. Watch the video to the end, and you will learn how just 500 knights, led by a leper king, changed the course of medieval history, forcing the great Sultan to flee the battlefield in complete disarray. I will reveal the most closely guarded secret of this era. It is important to realize that in 1177, the Kingdom of Jerusalem was in a state of deep crisis, despite its outward prosperity. The shadow of one of the most powerful leaders of the Muslim world, Saladin Yusuf ibn Ayyub, better known as Saladin, was looming over the Holy Land. He had already united Egypt and Syria under his rule, surrounding the tiny Christian states in a ring that was tightening with each passing year. On the throne of the Crusaders sat the young Baldwin IV, who was only 16 at the time, and more importantly, suffered from leprosy. This terrible disease made him a tragic and symbolic figure, as he was doomed to a slow decline. But this did not prevent him from being a strong and determined ruler. Despite his physical weakness, Baldwin IV possessed exceptional strength of spirit and a deep awareness of his mission, to defend Jerusalem at all costs. Many knights and barons did not believe in success, considering the king's illness to be a bad omen, a harbinger of the imminent fall of the kingdom. They preferred cautious, defensive tactics, avoiding open clashes with Saladin's superior forces. Public sentiment in the kingdom was close to panic, and many expected imminent surrender, or at least a very unfavorable peace. Saladin, sensing the precariousness of the Crusaders' position, decided to deliver a decisive blow, which in his opinion would finally break their resistance. He assembled an impressive army, which according to various sources, numbered between 25,000 and 30,000 soldiers, including elite cavalry and infantry. The Sultan planned to march quickly along the coast and take Jerusalem before the Europeans could gather reinforcements. Saladin's army moved out of Egypt, presenting a deadly force that seemed impossible to stop. The Sultan was confident of victory. He underestimated the religious fanaticism and desperation that could unite the besieged Crusaders. He saw before him only a sick young man and a handful of knights who, logically, were about to falter. King Baldwin IV, upon learning of the invasion, showed remarkable determination and courage, which were unusual for his age and condition. He refused to hide behind the city walls and decided to meet the enemy in the field, even though he could only count on a very small force. This decision was tantamount to madness, but it had a powerful psychological effect on his barons. He gathered the forces that were available, only about 500 knights and a few thousand infantrymen. It was a paltry force against Saladin's armada, but every warrior knew that he was standing on the last line of defense of his world. It was at this moment that despair turned into fury and faith into a steel blade that they were ready to place in the hands of the young monarch. The tension in Jerusalem grew with every passing hour. People prayed for a miracle because without the intervention of higher powers, victory seemed impossible. But one circumstance that Saladin had overlooked had already begun to work against him: the very speed and audacity of his advance. It was in this critical situation that the true character of the king and his entourage was revealed. They did not lose heart and did not surrender in the face of the inevitable, but decided that it was better to die in battle than to surrender the holy city. We are very interested in hearing your opinion. What do you think about such a reckless but inspiring decision? Write about it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on new exciting stories. Are you ready to learn the secret that turned the tide of the entire campaign and became the decisive moment in the confrontation between the two greatest figures of the 12th century? For Saladin, the road to Jerusalem was supposed to be a triumphal march, a demonstration of the strength and confidence of his army. However, reality turned out to be much harsher. What was intended to be a confident march to the holy site turned into a series of trials, miscalculations, and ultimately a fatal mistake that cost the Sultan one of the most humiliating failures of his illustrious career. When Saladin's army moved along the coast, the decision seemed flawless. The route provided convenient supplies, water, and easy coordination between units. However, it was this predictability that became a trap. The Crusaders easily figured out the intended route, which meant they could occupy strategically important points in advance, block advantageous directions, and prepare for an unexpected counterattack. While the main Christian army under King Baldwin IV rushed to Ascalon to try to intercept the Sultan's advance, some of the knights were left behind to defend the kingdom's most important fortresses. In Ascalon itself, the king was able to gather only 375 knights, joined by several thousand infantrymen. This was not much by the standards of the time, almost nothing. But it was this small force that became the king's last resort, his last hope. Realizing that he would be crushed in open battle against Saladin's powerful army, Baldwin did not seek a direct confrontation. Instead, he chose a different path, a difficult, exhausting march, designed as a trap that would force Saladin to make a mistake. The Sultan, confident that the Christians could only flee or hide in their fortresses, made his first strategic miscalculation. He decided that the garrison of Ascalon was completely blocked and unable to come out to meet him. Confident in his own unquestionable strength, he bypassed the city without even attempting to destroy the defenders there. For him, it was just a waste of time, an unnecessary distraction from his main goal, Jerusalem. Meanwhile, Saladin's army continued to advance, raiding the surrounding Christian settlements. The destruction of villages, the capture of prisoners, and looting all created a sense of complete invulnerability. The Sultan's soldiers relaxed their discipline, convinced that the danger was behind them. Some units began to loot away from the main forces, stretching the army's line of movement for many kilometers. This became a critical factor. The stretched-out, scattered army lost its ability to respond quickly to danger. It was at this moment that an opportunity arose for a daring strike by the Crusaders. A man whose name has become legendary, Reginald de Chatillon, played a key role in the events that unfolded. One of the most experienced, cruel, and uncompromising barons of the kingdom, he was the living embodiment of the knightly spirit. His detachment of 80 knights, which was with the king, literally thirsted for battle. Reginald believed that courage and fury could overcome any numerical disadvantage, and his unshakable confidence was contagious to everyone around him. Even Chatillon's mere presence boosted the army's morale. He was a man who never retreated. And above it all stood King Baldwin IV, a young, seriously ill, but incredibly resilient ruler. His illness progressed, causing him physical pain, but he continued to sit in the saddle, enduring long journeys. He did not waste his energy on grand speeches. His example spoke louder than any words. Seeing that the king, doomed by doctors, was still leading the way, the knights were so determined that they were ready to follow him even into the fiery abyss. They felt that there was no turning back. And suddenly, after a grueling march, the Crusaders arrived at a place with a symbolic name, Montgisard, or Gerard's Mountain. It was a point where the terrain itself seemed to push them to decisive action. Here they found what they had hoped for. Saladin's army was stretched out, scattered, and practically unguarded. The Sultan, confident in the security of his rear, did not send out proper reconnaissance. His strategy was based on the idea that the enemies were far away, and therefore the threat was minimal. This complacency proved fatal for him. The Crusaders seized the opportunity and carried out a maneuver that would later be called one of the most daring and masterful in the history of the Holy Land campaigns. The risky march allowed them to bypass the Sultan's main forces and strike from a direction he did not expect at all. Subsequent events turned this maneuver into a crushing blow to an army that was considered invincible. But knowledge of the terrain and cunning strategy are only part of the answer. Want to know how just 500 knights managed to defeat an army of 25,000 in open battle and put Saladin himself to flight? In the next section, we will reveal the full secret of this incredible triumph. You've definitely never heard about this unique secret. The preparations for the Battle of Montgisard were unusual, involving not only tactics, but also a profound religious ritual designed to strengthen the knights' spirits. The knights understood that their forces were too small and that only a miracle could save them from defeat, so they turned to their main spiritual weapon, the life-giving cross. Traveling with the army led by Baldwin IV was Patriarch Amalric of Jerusalem, who carried this great Christian relic. It was a fragment of the cross on which, according to legend, Jesus Christ was crucified. The presence of this symbol of faith had a tremendous, indescribable significance for all the Crusaders. Patriarch Amalric stepped before the ranks of the Crusaders, raised the cross high above his head, and began to recite a prayer. The knights, kneeling in the dust, felt their fear give way to religious ecstasy and fierce determination. They saw the relic not as a mere piece of wood, but as a sign that God himself was on their side. The Patriarch's prayer was the culmination of this ritual. He asked for strength, victory, and intercession. The knights, repeating the words of the prayer, rose to their feet as different people. Their eyes burned with determination that did not depend on the number of enemies. They were ready to die, but not to retreat a single step, which made them incredibly dangerous opponents. King Baldwin IV himself, a young man afflicted with leprosy, ordered his weakened hands to be tied to the reins so that he would not fall from his saddle during the attack. He could not participate in the battle at full strength, but his presence in the front ranks with the life-giving cross was the strongest motivating factor. The knights saw that their king would not spare even himself. This spiritual preparation was tactically important because it transformed a handful of weary warriors into a fanatical united fist. Their attack would not be just a military operation, but a sacred act, which gave them reckless courage and superhuman strength. They believed they were dying for Christ, and this made them immune to fear. Patriarch Amalric finished his prayer, gave the knights his blessing, and that moment became the signal to begin the attack. With loud cries of "God is with us," Deus Vult, the Crusaders rushed forward, and their onslaught was so unexpected and fierce that it took the Muslims by surprise. It was not just an attack, but an explosion of religious fervor that shook Saladin's army to its foundations. The Muslims, caught off guard and scattered across the terrain, were unable to respond quickly to this frenzied onslaught. Faith truly became the force that gave the knights' swords extra sharpness. Thus, the ritual with the life-giving cross and the personal courage of the young king became not just a beautiful historical detail, but an essential element in preparing for battle. They provided the psychological readiness that allowed a small army to crush an enemy that vastly outnumbered them. Want to know how this small army was able to inflict a crushing defeat on the great Saladin? Like this video, and we will continue our exciting journey into history. What you are about to learn will completely change your perception of knightly battles. The Battle of Montgisard is not just an episode in history, but a striking example of how determination, surprise, and fanatical faith can crush a force that vastly outnumbers you. The entire structure of the battle became a textbook example of a lightning strike delivered at the very moment when the enemy least expected it. Saladin's army, a huge force assembled from different parts of his domain, stretched for many kilometers. The troops marched at a leisurely pace, confident that the main danger was already behind them. They believed that King Baldwin had barricaded himself in Ascalon, and that battle for them was a matter for tomorrow. But it was this complacency, which seemed harmless, that became the turning point, turning a well-organized army into a vulnerable target. The Crusaders' attack took place on November 25, 1177, and it was a moment that went down in history. Most of the Muslim army had already passed the main defensive lines, and, unsuspecting, remained in a state of marching dispersion. At that moment, the knights, hidden in the folds of the terrain, descended from the hills like a storm, like an avalanche of steel, leather, and holy wrath. Their battle cry echoed across the plain, and the heavy cavalry crashed right into the center of the Sultan's army. The vanguard was led by King Baldwin IV himself and the indomitable Reginald de Chatillon. They led the knights as if they held not only the fate of the battle in their hands, but the fate of the kingdom itself. The Crusaders' cavalry, packed tightly together, struck with such fury that their onslaught broke through the Muslim formation like fragile glass. Spears broke from the force of the impact, shafts cracked, and tips bent, but they were followed by swords, hammers, and maces. It was a blow that no tactical model could have predicted. The Muslim troops, consisting mainly of light cavalry and auxiliary units, found themselves trapped. They were accustomed to maneuvering, to tactics of quick attacks and retreats. But here, in a tight scrum under the blows of heavy cavalry, all their advantages evaporated. Disorganized, stretched out, and unprepared for close combat, they became easy prey. The deep ranks of the Crusaders crushed them, turning their formation into a chaotic mass. Saladin, who was riding with the vanguard far ahead, did not immediately understand what had happened. Reports of the attack seemed exaggerated to him, but when he realized that this was not a small raid, but a full-scale strike on the center of his army, it was already too late. His troops were torn apart, the front and rear units lost contact, and panic spread faster than he could give orders. His attempts to organize resistance were met with a fierce, dense wall of Crusaders who seemed to feel no fatigue. The Crusaders did not retreat a single step. Contrary to the traditions of heavy cavalry, they did not withdraw to regroup after the first strike. On the contrary, they continued to press forward, using their advantage in numbers and armor. They pressed, chopped, and pushed, turning the attack into a continuous, crushing pressure. The infantrymen who followed the knights secured their success by finishing off those who tried to break out or retreat. In the thick of battle, Reginald de Chatillon proved himself to be a true hammer of God. He seemed to be everywhere at once. His sword rose and fell, leaving a trail of blood behind him, and his fury inspired the others. For many Crusaders, he became the embodiment of just retribution. His figure became a symbol of the Battle of Montgisard, the embodiment of a force capable of breaking any numerical superiority. The fury of the Crusaders was so great that it had a profound psychological effect on the Muslim warriors. Many of them saw their enemies not as people, but as almost supernatural beings, defenders of the faith, led by a sacred relic and a leper king, who, despite his illness, continued to fight side by side with his knights. This fear paralyzed their will to resist, turning retreat into a panicked flight. When Saladin finally realized that what was happening was not a temporary difficulty, but a catastrophe, it was too late. His best troops, the elite Mamluks, were thrown back and mixed with the fleeing troops. The previously unblemished commander experienced the true horror of defeat for the first time. He had to flee with the remnants of his personal guard, abandoning the baggage train, a significant part of the treasures, supplies, and even his own nephew, who had been taken prisoner. This defeat was not a mere setback, but a complete rout. The Sultan's army was virtually destroyed, and Saladin was forced to retreat hastily to Egypt to regain his strength and preserve what remained of his authority. And now a question that seems completely unexpected. What was the true cost of building the simplest roof over one's head in medieval England? How do the sufferings of the workers echo this great battle? More on this next time. The Battle of Montgisard ended in a complete and crushing defeat for Saladin's army, which was the biggest defeat of his entire military career. The Crusaders struck a blow that the Sultan did not expect at all, and his troops were unable to regroup after the first powerful attack. This came as a shock to the Muslim army, as Saladin was considered a talented commander, and his forces usually acted in unison. The defeat was so swift that many soldiers did not even understand how the situation had gone from a confident march to a complete disaster. The Muslim army did not just lose, it effectively ceased to exist as an organized force. Huge detachments were forced to throw down their weapons and flee, as they saw no way to stop the Crusaders. Panic swept through the ranks, especially when the troops realized that their flanks had been destroyed, and their commanders were unable to restore order. As a result, the battle turned into a chaotic retreat, which only exacerbated the scale of the defeat. Saladin's losses were colossal and shocked even those accustomed to the brutal realities of war. It is believed that he lost up to 90% of his army, including thousands of soldiers killed, wounded, and captured. Many of his closest commanders were either killed in battle or captured, depriving him of his important core personnel. For an army that was supposed to continue fighting for the Holy Land, this was an almost irreparable blow. The Sultan's personal guard, whose soldiers were always considered the best among the Muslim forces, suffered particularly heavy losses. These soldiers were distinguished by their bravery and discipline, but even they could not stop the rapid advance of the Crusaders. The defeat of the elite unit undermined Saladin's prestige, as it was this guard that was supposed to ensure his victories. After Montgisard, it was unable to recover its former strength. Saladin's flight was another blow to his authority. He was forced to leave the battlefield hastily, abandoning his personal equipment, tents, and even part of the treasury. Such a decision was rarely made and was considered extremely shameful for a ruler who sought to consolidate his power. However, at that moment, he had no other choice. Otherwise, he could have ended up among the dead or prisoners. The Sultan had to make his way to Egypt under difficult conditions, accompanied only by a small group of bodyguards. His journey was fraught with anxiety, as rumors of the complete defeat of the Muslim army spread along the way. This whole story only reinforced the impression of the scale of the disaster that had occurred at Montgisard. Many contemporaries recalled this period as a time of deep turmoil among Saladin's supporters. The Crusaders' victory was not simply a matter of luck, but the result of a competent tactical decision and incredible resilience. Their army was significantly outnumbered, but acted in a more organized and decisive manner. The Crusaders managed to strike at a moment when Saladin's forces were stretched thin and unprepared for battle. This allowed them not only to stop the enemy, but also to put them to flight. After their victory, the Christians captured a huge amount of spoils, including gold, weapons, provisions, and a large number of horses. These spoils proved vital for the Kingdom of Jerusalem, which was going through difficult times. The new resources made it possible to strengthen the army, improve supplies, and restore confidence in their own abilities. Thanks to this, the kingdom was able to stay on the brink of survival. The psychological effect of the victory was enormous and quickly spread throughout the Christian world. People perceived the success as a real miracle because the Crusaders were fighting against a much stronger enemy. The young King Baldwin IV, despite his illness, became a symbol of courage and faith. His image strengthened the fighting spirit and left a deep mark in the chronicles of that time. The defeat at Montgisard shattered the myth of Saladin's invincibility, who had long been considered the most dangerous enemy of the Crusaders. Learning of his weakness, some Muslim leaders began to resist his influence and seek ways to gain independence. This led to new intrigues and uprisings, which weakened his ability to wage active campaigns. The Sultan's power was indeed shaken, and he had to expend his energy on restoring order. Although Montgisard did not mark the end of the Crusades, it gave the Kingdom of Jerusalem an important respite of almost a decade. During this time, the walls of the fortresses were strengthened, diplomatic ties were established, and new garrisons were put in place. The kingdom was able to improve its economic situation and prepare for future challenges. This decade was a salvation for it, allowing it to hold out in the struggle for much longer. What if I showed you a time machine? The Battle of Montgisard taught Saladin a harsh but necessary lesson, which he learned and used in his future military campaigns. The defeat itself showed him that even the most experienced commander can make mistakes if he is too confident. He realized that past victories are no guarantee of future success. This made him much more cautious in his decisions and in how he assessed his opponents. The main conclusion was that arrogance and underestimating the enemy can cost even the greatest ruler his success. Before Montgisard, Saladin had been accustomed to considering his army invincible. But the clash with the small forces of the Crusaders shattered that belief. He realized that every battle requires careful analysis and preparation. Even an enemy that seems weak at first glance can deliver a powerful blow if underestimated. The first important lesson he learned concerned reconnaissance and security. He was so confident that the Crusaders were trapped in Ascalon that he actually relaxed and did not post reliable sentries. Because of this, he failed to notice the enemy's maneuver, which managed to bypass his positions. This was a painful reminder to him that a lack of information makes an army blind. After Montgisard, Saladin began to monitor the enemy's movements much more closely and no longer allowed his troops to stretch out on the march. He constantly sent scouts ahead to learn about threats in advance. His commanders were ordered to keep their ranks tighter and prevent disorder in the troop formation. Thanks to this, his armies later acted much more cohesively. The second important lesson concerned discipline. Before the battle, his army scattered in search of loot, which completely disrupted their order. The soldiers were scattered, and when the attack began, they were unable to quickly regroup. It was this disorganization that was one of the reasons for the defeat. Saladin realized that victory was impossible without strict control over the behavior of his soldiers. Later, he became much stricter in ensuring that no one left the ranks without orders. He demanded complete readiness for battle at any moment. His officers were given new responsibilities to maintain order in the units. All these measures made his army more manageable in subsequent campaigns. He also realized that he had underestimated the role of the Crusaders' heavy cavalry. Their knights, clad in armor, delivered devastating blows that his light cavalry could not cope with. Montgisard became an example to him that light horsemen are effective in maneuver warfare, but inferior in head-on combat. After that, Saladin began to pay special attention to creating his own heavy cavalry units. He improved their weapons and trained his soldiers to act in close formation so that they could withstand the knights' attacks. These measures later played an important role in his future victories. He learned another important lesson. You cannot rely solely on numbers. To defeat the Crusaders, it was necessary to completely cut off their access to fortresses and supply bases. Even a small garrison could launch a surprise attack if left unattended. This is exactly what happened at Montgisard, when the Crusaders from Ascalon suddenly advanced and struck his rear. After that, Saladin began to build a strategy around the complete suppression of enemy fortresses. He began to pay more attention to sieges, trying not to leave any unconquered strongholds behind. This tactic allowed him to maintain the initiative with much more confidence. His subsequent campaigns, including the Battle of Hattin, showed that he had become much more patient. He no longer sought quick battles, preferring to wear down his opponents with shortages of water or food. He understood that time was sometimes a better ally than speed. This was a direct response to the defeat, which taught him not to rush. The defeat at Montgisard forced him to rethink his approach to building an army. He decided to rely not only on Syrian and Egyptian troops, but also on the Mamluks, who were better trained. These warriors were distinguished by their discipline, fortitude, and ability to operate in the most difficult conditions. In the future, it was the Mamluks who became one of the main pillars of his state. Montgisard became a real turning point for him. He emerged from the battle not only defeated, but also changed. He realized that the fanaticism and desperation of the Crusaders could be more dangerous than their numbers or weapons. Such determination could turn the tide of any battle, and he began to take this into account in his plans. Saladin learned not to repeat his mistakes. He became a more judicious, cautious, and calm commander. This allowed him to achieve successes that later brought him fame as one of the greatest rulers of the East. Montgisard was his downfall, but it was thanks to it that he was able to rise again. In the next chapter, we will see how this victory affected the fate of the Kingdom of Jerusalem and why, despite its triumph, it failed to save it in the long run. Although the Crusaders celebrated their success, their position remained unstable. They needed time, strength, and allies who could not always help. The ambush was effective, but how did the Apaches sustain themselves during long campaigns far from home? Their endurance and ability to survive in harsh conditions amazed even their enemies. In the next chapter, we will discuss their unique system of logistics and survival. The victory at Montgisard, although a tactical triumph, did not solve all the strategic problems of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, but only gave it a 10-year reprieve. This victory inspired the Crusaders, strengthened the position of the young king, and gave European monarchs a reason to continue supporting the Holy Land. The first and most important consequence was that the myth of Saladin's invincibility was dispelled. This allowed the Crusaders to regain their confidence and rally around their young but brave king. Many barons who had doubted his ability to rule now recognized his legitimacy. The victory gave the kingdom a respite during which it was able to strengthen its borders and fortresses. Walls were rebuilt, garrisons were replenished, and the supply system was established. This was extremely important, as the Crusaders understood that Saladin would surely return, and they needed to be prepared for his new attack. However, the victory also had a negative effect. It gave the Crusaders a false sense of security and complacency. Many of them decided that Saladin had been defeated once and for all, and that there was no need to fear his return, which led to a decline in vigilance and internal strife. Despite the victory, a fierce struggle for power between various factions of the nobility continued in the kingdom. King Baldwin IV's progressive illness was a constant source of intrigue and attempts to seize the regency. These internal conflicts undermined the unity of the kingdom. King Baldwin himself, despite his victory, continued to suffer from leprosy. His physical condition deteriorated, and he gradually lost the ability to effectively govern the state. This weakened central authority and gave more leeway to rebellious barons. Montgisard also failed to bring a significant influx of new forces from Europe. Satisfied with the victory, European monarchs decided that the kingdom was safe and did not rush to send reinforcements and money. They misjudged the threat that still emanated from Saladin. Ultimately, the respite bought with blood at Montgisard was not fully utilized. Internal strife and complacency prevented the Crusaders from creating a truly strong, unified state capable of withstanding Saladin's next attack. The role of the young King Baldwin IV in the Battle of Montgisard was not merely nominal, it was decisive, albeit tragic. Although he was only 16 years old and his body was already beginning to be ravaged by leprosy, he managed to maintain a clear mind and strength of spirit. His weakness did not prevent him from making difficult decisions that determined the fate of the entire kingdom. It was this inner fortitude that made him a figure to whom even the most experienced commanders listened. First and foremost, his personal presence on the battlefield was of great importance, as it became a powerful source of inspiration for the knights. They saw their king tied to his saddle, but not losing his willpower and determination. This sight made each of them feel responsible for his life and for the fate of Jerusalem. Baldwin's example was so powerful that many considered his appearance a sign that could change the course of the battle. For the soldiers, Baldwin became a living symbol that even serious illness could not break the spirit of a true leader. He understood that his presence was more important than any order he could give from afar. In those moments when he appeared before the ranks seemed to grow stronger and more confident. The people saw that their king was ready to fight shoulder to shoulder with them, and this awakened incredible fortitude in them. One of the king's most important decisions was to give the order not to remain in Ascalon. He understood that a protracted defense would only give Saladin the advantage. Instead, Baldwin decided on a rapid march that allowed him to bypass the enemy. This decision went against the advice of cautious courtiers, but it was the key to victory. The risky maneuver allowed the Crusaders to strike Saladin's army when it least expected an attack. Baldwin relied on speed and surprise, well aware that the enemy's numerical superiority could only be neutralized by a desperate maneuver. His confidence in this decision strengthened the confidence of the knights, who had to carry out this plan without the right to make mistakes. It was here that his maturity, despite his young age, was evident. The king insisted that the Holy Cross be carried onto the battlefield. Understanding the power of this symbol better than many priests, he knew that the cross would become the spiritual core of the army, uniting every knight and foot soldier under a single idea. This step strengthened their resolve and filled the army with confidence that the battle had a sacred meaning. It was faith that transformed an ordinary army into a force capable of withstanding the onslaught of Saladin's superior forces. Baldwin was well aware that the psychological state of the army was half the battle. When the Crusaders saw the cross before them, they felt that their struggle was supported by heaven. This increased their fortitude and made them less susceptible to fear. In a battle of equals, this could have played a role, but at Montgisard it became the factor that tipped the scales. In the heat of battle, Baldwin IV did not retreat to safety, but remained in the front lines. He was in poor physical condition, but refused to leave the field while his army needed support. He understood that his retreat could be interpreted as a sign of weakness. He remained among the knights even when the fighting became particularly intense. His figure, visible among the fighters, prevented the army from faltering and kept them in formation. For many Crusaders, he was not just a king, but a living banner that could not be lost under any circumstances. This became one of the decisive factors in the steadfastness of the Christian army. Baldwin showed rare political wisdom, managing to unite the most influential barons around him. He understood how dangerous internal conflicts were at a time when the kingdom was under threat. He managed to temporarily suppress the ambitions of such complex figures as Reginald de Chatillon. This unity, albeit short-lived, was an essential part of the overall victory. The victory at Montgisard was the pinnacle of his reign and cemented his reputation as one of the bravest kings of his time. He proved that his illness had not robbed him of his strength and ability to lead his people. On that day, Baldwin IV went down in history as the ruler who, by his personal example, managed to defeat the great Saladin. His name became a symbol of courage and unyielding will throughout the Christian world. Although Montgisard was a triumph, it should not be forgotten that the Crusaders were incredibly close to complete and utter defeat, and only a single strategic mistake by Saladin saved them from destruction. The Sultan's army, even when scattered, could have regrouped at any moment and crushed the small Crusader force. Had Saladin not been distracted by looting and weakened his guard, he would have had every chance of destroying Baldwin IV. His army was 4 to 5 times larger, and if he had engaged in organized combat, victory would have been his. The Sultan himself gave the Crusaders a chance. The Crusaders were exhausted from the long march from Ascalon. They were tired, hungry, and deep behind enemy lines. If Saladin had not fled but had tried to surround them and cut off their supply lines, they would not have been able to hold out for long. The Knights' attack was a gamble. If the first assault had been repelled or stopped, the Crusaders would have lost all their momentum and been destroyed by the superior forces of the Muslims. The whole plan depended on one thing: surprise and the force of the attack. There were many moments in the battle itself when the outcome could have turned against the Crusaders. For example, if one of the barons had lost his nerve and faltered, or if the Muslim commanders had been able to quickly organize a flanking counterattack. But that did not happen. Victory was made possible by religious fanaticism, which essentially pushed the knights beyond their physical limits. They fought not as soldiers, but as martyrs, and this was impossible to predict or assess. It was this element of desperation, multiplied by faith, that became their main weapon. They knew they had no other choice, and this knowledge gave them superhuman strength. They risked everything and won. The Battle of Montgisard occupies a special place in the history of the Crusades because it was the last major victory of the Kingdom of Jerusalem in open battle against the combined forces of the Muslims. It was not just luck, but a rare moment when the Christian army showed incredible unity and determination. The victory quickly became part of legend, as it happened at a time when the kingdom's situation seemed almost hopeless. For many contemporaries, it proved that spirit can be stronger than circumstances. This victory entered the oral tradition of knights, chroniclers, and pilgrims, who saw it as a symbol of fortitude. People talked about it as a feat accomplished against all odds and logic. The fact that the battle was led by a young, seriously ill king made a particular impression, reinforcing the sense of wonder. Over the years, Montgisard became one of the most important pages in the history of the kingdom. Montgisard delayed the fall of Jerusalem for a decade, giving the Crusaders critically important time. Without this victory, Saladin could have moved on the city in the coming years, and the defenders would hardly have been able to hold out. This delay allowed the kingdom to strengthen its walls, replenish its garrisons, and conclude several important agreements. As a result, Jerusalem survived longer than it would have otherwise. If Saladin had taken the city in 1177 or 1178, the history of the region would have taken a completely different course. The European powers would not have had time to react, and Christian influence in the Holy Land would have declined much earlier. Montgisard forced Saladin to change his plans and retreat, which was rare in his military practice. This pause played an important role in subsequent events in the Middle East. The battle reinforced the myth in the minds of Europeans that God was on the side of the Crusaders and that the Kingdom of Jerusalem had received a sign from above. This perception strengthened support from Europe, where people saw the victory as confirmation of the righteousness of the Crusades. The victory inspired new donations, increased the influx of volunteers, and strengthened religious fervor. All of this gradually formed the basis for future campaigns. Over time, it was this victory that paved the way for the Third Crusade, which began after the fall of Jerusalem. It became one of those moments when Europe felt responsible for the fate of the Holy Land. Knights and priests referred to Montgisard in their sermons as proof that effort can yield results. Thus, the memory of the battle lived on, even after its strategic significance had faded. The victory demonstrated that even the most powerful military leaders can make mistakes, and that strength of spirit and faith can change the course of events. It showed that numerical superiority does not guarantee success if the enemy acts decisively and unexpectedly. For Europeans, it was a reminder of the importance of discipline, unity, and personal courage. For many knights, it became a model of true bravery. On the other hand, the defeat was also an important lesson for Saladin, forcing him to rethink his approach. After Montgisard, he became more methodical, patient, and cautious, trying to avoid hasty decisions. He began to pay more attention to supplying his army, reconnaissance, and choosing the right moment to attack. Ultimately, it was these changes that made his victory at Hattin and the subsequent capture of Jerusalem possible. Thus, Montgisard became a kind of final flash of glory for the old kingdom of Jerusalem, which soon entered a period of decline. This battle reminded the knights how great a force unity can be in the face of mortal danger. Although the kingdom ultimately fell, the memory of Montgisard preserved its honor and military reputation. He forever remained a symbol of what a small state can achieve when its warriors are united by a common goal. We see that the Battle of Montgisard was not just a battle, but a true clash of faith and destiny. The young king Baldwin IV, driven by desperate faith and superhuman courage, was able to crush the army of the great Saladin, giving his kingdom a decade of peace. This is a story about how the will of one man and deep conviction can change the course of history. What moment in this story seems most incredible to you? The courage of the leprous king, the suddenness of the attack, or how the life-giving cross inspired the knights to victory? Share your opinion in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on new exciting research into the military tricks of the past.